and welcome to today's Missio Nexus webinar. I'm Heather Pubels, the founder of Leitmotif, a communications consulting firm and Missio Nexus member organization. I'm partnering with Missio Nexus to discover topics and find effective presenters that can address ways mission agencies can improve their marketing and communications efforts. Before we get started with the webinar, I want to let you know that Missio Nexus has a cohort called Communications Director and Staff. If you are involved in marketing or communications with a mission agency, this cohort is for you. It's a great place for you to meet, learn from, and be encouraged by others in your domain. At the end of this webinar, I'll give you instructions on how to find and sign up for that cohort. For today, Palmer Holtz of In Christ Communications will be presenting our webinar entitled Crisis Communications Essentials. Palmer is the president of In Christ Communications, a national full-service communications firm primarily serving faith-based ministries and businesses. He has more than 30 years experience in journalism, corporate and agency public relations, and marketing and advertising, and previously worked as a newspaper editor, corporate media relations executive, advertising agency executive, and private business owner. You can learn more about In Christ Communications online on their website at inchristcommunications.com. Remember, please put your questions in the chat panel as you think of them. We'll get to as many of them as we can at the end of the presentation. Palmer, it's great to have you here with us today, and welcome.
Thank you, Heather. Appreciate it. Thanks for inviting me. This is something I've wanted to do for a long time, is get in front of this group. And I think I may have had a webinar, a workshop at one of your conferences on this. I can't remember. I do it so many different places, but some folks on this webinar may have heard me before. So, but it never hurts to hear it again, because it's pretty good gold to use with your organization when crises are. It's not a question of if one's going to happen. It's usually when. So let me just go ahead and get started. So what we want to talk about is crisis communications essentials, and this is from a talk I give periodically. Crisis communications I call crisis management's redheaded stepchild. Okay, you've heard that cliche before. Goofy little picture there, but basically a redheaded stepchild is someone who is left out often. In a lot of cultures, red hair is strange, and they call them ginger people, and and wonder where that came from. And a stepchild's not like an organic natural child, and they get left out. So crisis communications, as a part of a crisis management professionalism, sometimes gets overlooked, and it's a really important facet of crisis management, because you can handle your crisis perfectly well and mishandle your communications, and your ship's going to go to the bottom. So that's why it's really important to get people's attention on this. I got it started in most of the crisis work during the Ebola crisis with SIM about probably 4 or 5 years ago, and realized there was a dearth of they were not prepared for crisis communications, didn't have a team, didn't have a plan, didn't have assets, resources. And so it just opened my eyes to the fact that all these faith-based parachurch organizations and churches, they may have a crisis management plan, but they don't have a crisis communications plan. And 80 to 90% of what you do in crisis communications in the midst of a crisis, you can do ahead of time. You can prepare it ahead of time. You can stage it. You can templatize it. So I've sort of become a Johnny Appleseed, trying to get people to pay attention to this and do something about it. And I'm a member of an organization. Some of you may have people in your organizations that are part of this. It's called the Risk Management Network. And it's an organization that just became a nonprofit of crisis communication, crisis management and security and child safety people from all the large international missions agencies, the Crews of the World Vision, Compassion, Samaritan's Purse. But then a lot of other medium-sized ones and some small ones in there too. It's like a room full of John Waynes. They're all ex-military, ex-FBI, Secret Service, Army Black Ops. they're the people you want in charge of a crisis if one's going on. I mean, Samaritan's Purse's crisis management coordinator is an ex-general. So I'm a part of that organization because I bring the crisis communications professionalism to the group. So, but let me go ahead and get started with just tell you a little bit. In Crisis Communications, we're a full spectrum communications agency. I'm based outside of Charlotte, North Carolina, but all my folks are all over the country. We've got 12 to 15 folks working for us from the West Coast to the Southwest to the Southeast to the Northwest and Northeast. We're all over. So, and we do everything from branding to marketing to advertising, media relations, crisis communications, social, digital, special events, creative services, those kinds of things. Full spectrum. Okay. And we do work with some churches. Every once in a while, I'll work with authors or musicians, but a lot of times they're in and out of, those kind of people are in and out of projects. And I'd rather have somebody I work with, over a long time. I've worked for some ministries for 10 or 15 years. So, and most of our clients are large national and international faith-based nonprofits, parachurches. I was I was at Cape Town for the Lausanne conference years ago. I was on the communications committee team, and I reported on world missions. So missions has become a sweet spot for us. We do a lot of missions agencies. Just here's some of the folks that we work with. We started off with we do work for ECFA, Asian Access. I'm trying to find some missions agencies. Bibles for the World, Gospel for Asia is a client. Cross Olive works with a lot of international ministries. I started off working with the Jesus Film Project, Pioneer Bible Translators, Reach Beyond, the Mission Society. We do work with a lot of work with Missions Network News, and I know some of you all have relationships there. SIM Sat7 is a television broadcast satellite ministry in the Middle East. We've done work with Wycliffe Associates, Voice of the Martyrs, Open Doors. So these are some of the clients that we have worked with and currently work with. So what we want to do today is talk about crisis communications, okay? So the purpose of crisis communications planning, is to be prepared before a crisis gets there. You don't want to be flat-footed when bullets are whizzing past your head trying to figure this out, because it's hard enough to do it if you planned it. But so you really want to be prepared ahead of time. It's really important to effectively manage communications through formally, clearly defined channels, because it can be very confusing and a lot of chaos. But if you have well-defined channels ahead of time that that are broken in and are practiced, and a lot of times people need to practice crisis scenarios so that they get a feel for using a plan. But it's really important to have those channels clearly defined. A crisis communications plan can in some ways sometimes prevent crises, but they can certainly mitigate and lessen the severity of a crisis and the negative repercussions for an organization. And having a crisis communications plan in place really helps protect your reputation of leadership, and so that they can be come off well and handle vital issues with reasonable transparency, and you don't have to do reputation management recovery because it can get very expensive. Why are crisis communications plans not done? Why are they the stepchild? Well, people take it for granted that it's something that they just don't think about. They don't think too deeply about what the ramifications of it are. They don't think it's important. Solving the crisis is important. They don't understand the news media and stakeholder management and communications and how those things work. They think it's easy, that it's, because they haven't thought much about it, but they haven't had a chance to, because that's not what they do. But that's what you do, and my hope is that we can get in front of some of these decision makers and help them understand that you got to have this in place, or you got a great vulnerability. I was telling Heather earlier, all these organizations, they're naked. They just don't know it, and I'm trying to help them see that. And and a lot of they get once they get it, they get it. But they don't want to because it smells like time. It smells like money, work. So they're afraid of it. The news media scares a lot of people because, if you mess up on, live television in an interview, that's, if public speaking is, people would rather die than speak in public. Think about what it means to speak in front of a live camera with a hostile reporter there, barking at you. It can be very stressful. And I put down here, it's a step job because a lot of people think it's for liberal arts dudes. Most of the people who are into the crisis management side of things and security, they didn't major in English. They're business people. They were engineers. I mean, they're practical, applied knowledge folks. And, they think this is for somebody else, and it takes somebody with, has to have a good communication skills to do this. And the liberal arts person is generally the best person. But, a lot of people just write it off. They think it's for somebody else, not them. Okay. So what are the benefits of having a plan? Like I said, 80 to 90% of what you do in crisis communications can be done ahead of time, staged, templatized, practiced. The communications roles are clearly in crisis management. In crisis communications, the roles are clearly defined, the responsibilities, the decision sequencing, the channels, the deliverables. All those things are all lined up ahead of time so that you can an emergency break glass and you've got almost everything you need there. One of the benefits is clear communications with all stakeholders. You need to draw a circle around your stakeholder universe. This is a lot about media, but there are other stakeholders you have to take into account. Paul said, "I'm all things to all people that I might win them to Christ." So he sort of bent his message to suit the audience. And so we need to think about, you don't say the same thing to a board member that you'd say to a staff person or a strategic partner, but you have to take all those stakeholders into account and understand ahead of time what the communications channels are that you use to reach them and what are the deliverables within those channels, and have that all staked out, because ideally you want everybody to hear the same thing the same way, mostly in the same time frame. And so everybody goes together in lockstep, so there's no leakage, and everybody stays together. It's one of the benefits of having this is for reputation management. You can spend thousands of dollars trying to, and there are ways to do this. You can go on the internet, you can dilute the algorithm with good news and neutral news, and cause bad news to sink lower on the back pages, but it can cost a lot of money. I had one ministry, it was a $300 million missions agency that had people in another country putting out a lot of phony information about them, and it was on the internet, and they spent $30,000 a month for 6 months to get it to sync to the second and third pages. So it takes a lot of good news and neutral news to move that stuff away. And it can be done, but if you have a plan in place that can keep you from having damage to your reputation, you can save a lot of money. The benefits, I've talked about that. Here we go. The dangers of not having a crisis communications plan. Like I said, you can handle crisis management well and blow the communications, and you might as well have botched the crisis management. It can, if you don't have a plan, you can end up mishandling problems and exacerbate them, make them even worse. You can do short-term and long-term reputation damage, which leads to expensive reputation management repair. A lot of ministry can lose revenue, and the ministry itself can be jeopardized. I've heard of some missions agencies that, in the past, they've had problems with mission schools around the world, and all these, sexual allegations are coming out 30, 40 years later. And if they all, they do the math, and if they all sued and they all got a certain amount of money, there'd be no ministry. It'd be out. It'd be over. So, it could bring a ministry down. And then this last thing is sort of a tongue-in-cheek remark: decided to want to spend more time with your family. That's code for you can lose your job. Somebody can lose their job over this if you don't have a plan in place. And it gets out of control. People, they said he wants to spend more time with his family. Well, no, they basically fired him, or he resigned because they wanted him to. So, or her. So those are some of the dangers of not having a plan. So why don't people have a plan, crisis communications plan? Like I said, it smells like time, smells like work. There are other priorities, and you're not looking for more work. You got enough to do these days. Everybody's stretched really thin, it's that people just put it off. Let's do it next year or the next year. I've had people I've been talking to for 3 or 4 or 5 years, and they're still pushing the same pile around the table and not deciding to do it. So anyhow, a lot of people think it costs a lot of money. It costs something, but it doesn't cost a lot. And budgets are tight, but it's not. It's like having insurance. You're not going to have a house and not have insurance on it. You'd be a fool to do that. So it's a good insurance policy, risk management. People underestimate the probability of a crisis, and they misunderstand the importance of having a plan. So it's one of these things that you don't have to do today. You can say that every day till you never do it. So let me mention this. So the types of crises, this is not a comprehensive total list, but these are kinds of crises you might run across. And international missions agencies have even more exposures because you've got, kidnappings, coups, pandemics, civil war. Overseas, it's just a whole nother slate of crisis scenarios. But most, morals issues, everybody's susceptible to that. Financial impropriety, that's a big one. There can be internal violence, workplace violence. It can be violence coming from the outside. Somebody, comes in and wants to shoot the place up. So again, we talked about international. That's a whole nother slate of scenarios. And then these days, there are a lot of social, political issues that become a crisis. Right now, we're dealing with a ministry in the Northwest, up in Washington State, and they're in Oregon too, and in California. And they're an evangelical ministry that, if people really knew who they were, they'd come after them over their policies about hiring and gender and marriage and abortion. So there are a lot of social, political issues out there that people could come at you with. I mean, look at what they're doing to, how they're hounding, Christian Cinema over her stands on the budget. They're very proactive when they have a cause that they live for. A cyber attack is another kind of crisis. So then just sort of a crisis communication cycle. This is where all the planning takes place, this preparedness. And then you and your team, once you have a plan, you respond to the crisis and you work through it, you recover. And this is right here, this response recovery, you're continually updating as a crisis unfolds. You're reassessing, you're reevaluating, you're updating. And then once the crisis is over, you want to make sure you go back very quickly in like a week or two and do an assessment about how you handle the crisis. What did you do well? What didn't you do well? What would you do? Could you do differently? So it's a process where you're continually refining this. And I suggest that organizations have a crisis training, a tabletop drill every year that involves the crisis communications team. It should be a whole crisis management team, of which crisis communications is a part, but it's something that ought to be practiced frequently. So here's a question I always ask my audience, and I've never gotten the answer that I've got. So I want to take a second, ask yourself, what is the greatest threat to your organization in your mind? And just take a second, think, what's the worst thing that could happen to us? Okay. So some people in the audience I've been before, and I tell people, so I'll give you $100 if you give me the right answer to this. And they say, well, kidnapping, a murder, a coup, a pandemic. Well, here's the greatest threat to your organization from a crisis management, crisis communications point of view. Your greatest threat to your organization is denial. Okay. So I put the word, Selah. Think about that. Denial. It's something, people don't want. They don't want to think about it. So that's really the greatest threat to an organization is not thinking something that's not going to happen to them. So, what are some of the rationales for that? They'll say it's never happened before here. It's not likely to happen here. Never happened. It's not likely to happen. If it happens, we can handle it, or God will protect us. Well, Joseph put up grain because he knew a famine was coming. He didn't wait till the famine got there. He knew ahead of time God told him what to do, and he did it. And so this is the same kind of thing. People have rationales why they don't want to do it, and they're sort of in denial. So think about that. I mean, that might be a question you pose to one of your leaders, because it was a pretty big revelation for me, because it's so true. Because I run into it. It's the biggest objection I get is that they don't think it's going to happen. So anyhow, how can you be better prepared for communications with a crisis? Well, there's three basic things. Number one is know your ministry. Number two is know your media. And number three know your stakeholders. So in terms of knowing your ministry, your folks need to have a shepherd mentality. You really need to know your ministry inside out, because in a crisis, you don't want to be trying to learn facts about the organization or who does what, or what your programs are. You really need to know you need to be a personification as a communications person, the personification of your ministry. You need to bleed whoever it is you work for. So that's hirelings. They don't, in a crisis, you need a shepherd mentality. Niches and beats. You need to know what kind of category your organization is in. You're all missions agencies. You're all Christians. You're all missions agencies. But you do different things, different ways, in different places for different groups. So, for instance, Mission Aviation Fellowship is a missions agency, but one of their niches is aviation, and so there's a whole raft of stakeholders. And engineers are sort of their bailiwick. Technical people are. So you need to know, and there are reporters out there that cover aviation that'd be interested in hearing about mission MAF. So you need to know who you are, what your identity is, apart from just being a missions agency. Leadership relationships. You need to have your own relationship with your CEO. You don't want to have to go through 2 or 3 people to get to the decision maker. You need to understand who he or she is, what their heart is, what their mind is, what their personality is. You need to know them personally, and because there's no substitute, things get lost in translation when you go through people to get to people. And if you can have a good relationship with your CEO, and probably your board chairman, it'll go a long way towards you getting to the organic nut of what the organization is really all about. So, and then internal sources. You need to know who's who in your organization and who does what, and develop relationships where they can feed you content, for you to be able to do your job. And so, during a crisis, you need to have you have relationships and a list of people that, if you need to go to somebody in some certain part of the world, about something, you've already got a relationship with them. These sources are already established. So, shepherd mentality, know what your organization is all about in a full spectrum kind of way. Have a good relationship with your leadership, to where you can read them, and you can think about what they would think before they thought it. Because you're thinking about communications and you know them, and you're thinking ahead. And then internal sources for information, you want them ahead of time before you need to go to them, because in a crisis you'll need to go to them, and you don't want to introduce yourself that day. So know your media. It's just have what we call an Acts 1:8 philosophy. Jesus said, "You'll be my disciples in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, the uttermost parts of the earth." So you need to own, in terms of media and stakeholders, you need to own your Jerusalem, the bullseye. Think of a bullseye in concentric circles of influence. So your local media would be very important to you, even though you're an international ministry. If you don't have a good relationship with your local media, you're missing something. Because during the Ebola crisis, SIM, the Charlotte media was all over it, and the Charlotte Observer is a decent newspaper, and so you want to understand who they are, and then think regionally. Say for Charlotte, North Carolina, and South Carolina media would be very important. And then some ministries have cities around the country that are important to them. Those are sort of their Jerusalems. But so you want to get the ones that are most important first, the ones that are secondary. Judea, they're cousins to Jerusalem. Those kinds of medias. But think in terms of influence of the media and especially geographically. You want to have prior relationships with the media. Again, if they know you ahead of time and you've sown some good news PR with them, you're going to you may get a pass during a crisis. I know of one major ministry that did great media relations work, and they went through a major crisis, and it took a while for the news media to come down on them because they didn't want to, but it became obvious that they had to. But that prior relationship was really important. And they had goodwill in an annual report when they're talking about the value of the company. There's an entry line. It's called goodwill, and it has a dollar value. So goodwill with the news media, equity banked with the news media, is really important, and it's based on relationships. You need to have a good media contact database. If you need to put out a press release, you need to have a list of all the major media, local and national, that's important to you, and the full contact information. Because when you put out a press release, you want the right people to get it. You need to do that ahead of time. You need to understand their needs and their methods. Media people, they're more than ever. It's a 24/7 beast that needs to be fed content. There are more people working harder for less money, longer hours than ever, and they're stressed, and they're in a hurry, and they have deadlines. They don't suffer fools lightly. The best method I ever came away with when I was working with SIM during the Ebola crisis was just serve them, be a servant to them, help them. I mean, they're not 9 out of 10 of them aren't trying to hurt you. They may be trying to sensationalize things. They may get things wrong, make mistakes, human and sometimes intentional, but most of them are decent people just trying to get their work done. And if you can help them and not take credit for it, because they're very proud, they don't want to take handouts from some PR flack. But if you can serve them, you're going to get the best shot at having a good story, or the best story that can be had out of maybe a bad situation. They'll treat you right if you understand how they work. Like at 3:00 in the afternoon, you don't call a television reporter because you're getting ready to go on at 4. So you just need to know how they operate and cater to them and serve them. Think pictures. Excuse me. If you can't get it on video for television, it does not exist. So when you think about the news media and about what coverage, think, especially when it comes to television, about what are they going to be showing, and sometimes stories don't lend themselves to something being seen, but like the Ebola crisis, it did. We got video, we got photos, that kind of thing. So in terms of television, I always think pictures. Know your stakeholders. It's really important to know who has a stake, has an interest in your organization, who can affect your organization or be affected by your organization. So I just say there's a stakeholder universe out there. You just need to figure out who's in it. And here's some examples of, this is not a comprehensive exclusive list, but the board, staff, if it's an educational institution, alumni, donors, the media is a huge stakeholder, strategic partners, could be churches, government, community, even vendors or stakeholders you need to take into account. So you need to know who they are. Well, come on. Okay, so crisis communications is really a subset of the crisis management team. And a crisis management team has a crisis manager and has a team under him or her. Okay. A part of that, somebody sitting at that table on the crisis management team is a crisis communications coordinator who's responsible for the crisis communications. And that coordinator has a team, and sometimes they have a consultant. It doesn't hurt. I know a lot of the crisis management people, they have on speed dial, these terrorism hostage negotiators trying to get people out of certain places. I mean, extract folks. So it wouldn't hurt to have a relationship with a firm like ours or some other firm that if you needed them, you could go to them, because you're going to need, maybe the World Visions of the world or Compassion International. They've got enough resources to have in-house the professionals they need to handle crisis communications, but it's a luxury. And so you can make yourself bigger on a temporary basis if you use some outside folks. And you can use some outside folks on your own team. You could find a photographer that you could pull in, or a videographer you could pull in a crisis if you have set that up ahead of time, or a graphic designer that you don't have to pay them every day to come to work. You get them on a small retainer or an agreement to where that if a crisis happens, they're available, and you create a team that way. But it doesn't hurt to have some outside counsel. All right. So here are the folks who are the players on a crisis communications team. Typically, there's a coordinator who's responsible for everything, overseeing it, managing it. You need a good writer, because there'll be a lot of writing involved, press releases and statements and talking points and Q&As and maybe some content for the web, social media. So you need to have a good writer, or somebody that understands writing news copy, not feature stories, not appeal letters. You need a writer who is a news writer, ideally. You need somebody. This trickles over into the web. They need to be a part of this, because a lot of the content will be on the web, or you'll probably can have a landing page dedicated to a crisis sometimes. SIM did. You need to have a social media coordinator who is ideally, it's not just someone who knows the technology and how it all works, but somebody who has a PR brain, or because social media is really just digital virtual community relations. It's what it is. So it helps to have somebody wearing that hat that's got that kind of mentality that when they see something, they say something, and they know what they have discernment about social media and when they can see something coming, or see that something that might turn into something worse, that they have a sort of savvy news judgment to them. You need a graphic designer at times. You may have to do graphs and charts, or to have somebody do some design work and design not just for the web as well. You're going to need. It's good to have a photographer or a videographer. If you got one in house, that's great. If you don't, I'd try to find one to get on some sort of retainer to use, because not only you may need them to take pictures or do video, but they should have archives of video, B-roll video, and photos that can be very useful. SIM didn't have any of that, and we had a hard time finding pictures of the missionaries that they caught Ebola. I mean, in a current bio. So those resources weren't even available. So it's good to have a team made up of these folks typically. Determine policy. This is important, and I'll try to go through this quickly. There's some organizations that are fairly transparent. Nobody's a fool and says everything without being filtering something. But there's other organizations that are very close to the vest, and they're almost defensive. I've worked for two major corporations in my life, Fortune 100 companies. One was open and transparent and honest, and they'd own things that they did wrong. Another one, they were like a hostile witness in a courtroom. You'd have to make them say it. And so you need to determine what your organization needs to determine what's your communications philosophy going to be. And I always err on the side of honesty and openness. They say, an alcoholic, the only way he stops being an alcoholic is to say he's one. You have to own it to disown it. So the quicker an organization can own their mess, the quicker they're going to get out of it with the least amount of damage. Own it to disown it. But some people don't want to do that. I told one guy, I said, it came down to making a decision. I said, you can save your pride and be right, or you can save your ministry. What do you want to do? Well, guess what he did? He chose his pride. He didn't want to admit that they'd done something wrong, and they paid through the nose for what happened after that. He could have short-circuited it right away. You can save your pride, or you can save your ministry. What do you want to do? So, it's a hard thing to say some CEO, but I'm trying to help them, and that's the best thing I can tell you. So it's your choice. Anyhow, you need to determine what your internal communications policy is going to be within your own organization, and then especially when it comes to social media, you need to figure out what your external communications policy is. There's a way to, like I say, you don't want to say everything to everybody unfiltered, and there's a way to where you don't say certain things and you say certain things a certain way, but you need to figure out what your external policy is going to be, especially dealing with the news media. You're gonna put up a wall, or you're gonna try to work with them and work through it. And then this sort of it can flow over into a personnel policy at some point. In terms of you need to create a crisis communications plan. You need to figure out who the team member roles are. You need to think about, what happens before a crisis, what happens during a crisis, what happens after a crisis. Take all that into account. A lot of drafts, a lot of revisions, and it helps to get some outside help doing it. Even if you do it yourself, you want your crisis communications plan to be vetted by a third party, because nobody sees everything all the time. So there could be holes in, because you can't see the forest for the trees. So it's good to have somebody outside. We do this. If people already have plans, we'll go through the plan and audit it, basically. But it's really important to have somebody else other than your organization look at it. So this is a checklist. It's just basically, in terms of putting your crisis communications plan together, you want to identify what some of the likely scenarios are. You want to make sure you understand who all your stakeholders are. For every scenario, you want to go ahead and frame out some key message points about it, whether it's a kidnapping, whether it's a morals issue, whether it's a financial issue, a social issue. Go ahead and ahead of time identify the scenarios. You understand what your stakeholder universe is. Determine what your key messages are for each scenario. Make sure people understand their roles, and it's really important to have cross training for the roles on your crisis communications team, because the Ebola crisis went on for 4 months, and that's a fatigue. There were days when Bruce Johnson, I wouldn't let him talk to the media because he was a toast, and so he finally found somebody to help him to take some of the load off of him. But every position ought to have somebody else that can do it, because people will get sick. People are traveling. When a crisis happens, you may have a member or two missing from your team. So make sure everybody's got a backup, okay? And then they're phone trees with numbers, so you don't have to look up numbers ahead of time. They're checklists that you need to have in place. Decision trees, we do a lot of that. You need to figure out, if you're going to have a press conference, where are you going to have it? And go ahead and have that set up. Have press kits already put together that you could hand out. All you have to do to update is to stick in the current press release and maybe a bio on your spokesperson. So get those ready ahead of time. Press release templates. We even do that for every scenario. We go ahead and sort of frame out and templatize a press release that we'll use 75 to 80% of it, and we'll just tweak it rather than have it create it from scratch. You want to get talking points, just like determining key messages. You want to make their talking points too. You want to anticipate adversarial media questions that might come up. What kind of nasty questions could we get, and what would the answers to those be? So you can think about that ahead of time. And then media distribution lists. It's important to have a distribution list where it's already in place, and if you had to put out a mass email to the news media, you'd already have your list compiled. You just push the button. And then media training. We do a lot of this. I call it adversarial media training. Hard questions under hot lights. It can get to that. And a lot of people can, they're good speakers in a pulpit or behind a podium or on a stage. But you get from a news television reporter, it's a different ballgame, and there's a different style. And media training is really important. Tiger Woods had a swing coach at the height of his golf game when he was the greatest golfer in the world. He still had a coach, and because you can always learn more. So media training is really important, and especially about getting your feet wet, but before you have to, get in front of a camera. So when we do the training, we start off. We do a lot of on-camera training, and we start off with easy questions. Give us your testimony. What do you do at the ministry? And then whatever it is that is the couple of their greatest crisis scenario possibilities, we'll ask them some hard questions about that, to where at the end they want to run out of the room because we pinned them against the wall. But it's good to do that before somebody else does it to you, because then you know how to handle it. Okay. So media training. You need to figure out who your spokespersons are going to be. You don't want your CEO to be the spokesperson. Number one, he or she needs to keep running the ministry. Business continuity is a big part of crisis management. Things, you can't stop the world when you have a crisis. And number two reason is, if something goes wrong during a crisis and the CEO is not the lead guy, he can always come in and fix it on the white horse, or the board chairman can do that. So it's good to have a high level, C-suite person who's, knows how to handle themselves and calm and is a good communicator, but don't use your CEO because save him or her for if you needed them later. And really, they need to run the organization and let somebody else, fight that war. I mean, the commander in chief is not on the battlefield; the generals are. So if you get an outside coach, try to find one that has a faith-based orientation, because a lot of these issues come up have Christian aspects to them that that they can help you work through in the training part. Practice. We recommend that people have a tabletop drill once a year. Every year, a different scenario. Go through the plan, revise the plan. You don't want it to sit on a shelf for 4 years and no one's ever looked at it since you handed it over. You need to practice it, because then you'll find out realistically what you can do. Communication sequence: if a crisis happens, always safety first. Everybody gets notified. You put your team together. I can't underemphasize the importance of prayer. During the Ebola crisis with SIM, this was a very big deal, and it made a difference. There were people that were praying around the clock for this, and it's really important part. People take it for granted and think that if I don't get it done, nobody's going to do it. But God's in charge, and ultimately the SIM people decided, we're not going to try to spin this issue. It's God's story. We're just going to tell it straight. And it turned out, I'll show you later, that they ended up on the cover of Time magazine. So you want to assess the situation. You want to develop your key messages, determine what your strategy is. And then you notify all the stakeholders, including the news media. But you're constantly reevaluating and reissuing your communications based on the changes in the crisis. There's where you update things. Role of social media. These days, social media can be the spark that starts a wildfire. Social media is kind of like underbrush in a forest. If it catches on fire, it'll spread rapidly and take the trees with it. So you can have one person that's talking to several people, and the news media more than ever are getting their news tips from social media. People send them stuff in social media, or they're monitoring social media. So more and more social media is huge, and it's the thing that can sort of help you the most and hurt you the most at the same time. So what are the benefits of social media? And again, if you can, the more professional person you have behind wearing that hat, who's not only technically savvy and platform savvy, but has good PR sense, that's the best person, because there's news judgment, there's judgment and discernment involved in what they do, because they're monitoring the world. So, and they need to be able to see things clearly. So you reach more people, they have greater access to your information. You bypass the news media. Donald Trump would have never been elected if it hadn't been for Twitter. I mean, he went around the media, and then the media reported on it. Like he got it both ways. I mean, in a good way, for him. You can talk straight to people without having your message filtered by the media. Of course, it increases the speed. Especially critical information gets out more quickly and speeds awareness. You're able to receive and get feedback. It's like social media is a finger on the pulse of what people are thinking and feeling. There's a lot of friend stuff out there, but if you step back and you look at, if you can read through the clutter and the garbage, and you'll start to see patterns emerge about where this is going, how this is going over. So it's very important to give that feedback, and you can easily update, your audiences very quickly. If something happens, you can just instantly get your message out there. Plus, you don't cut down the number of phone calls and emails you got to send. So the risks, of course, everyone is a spokesperson. That's, the social media's made, there was no such thing as a blogger, 30 years ago. But now everybody's an expert. And they say 49% of decision makers say social media makes them more vulnerable, and it does. It's like having all the shades up in your house at night. I mean, there's nowhere to hide. There's a danger of distribution of non-verified information can get out there. The narrative could be wrong. Increases the speed of a controversy. Things used to take, a long time to before it spread, but now it's instant. I can't remember the statistic, like, but by the time it takes 24 hours to respond to a crisis well, and it takes a minute for it to get on the other side of the world. I mean, around the world. And so it's out, it's the speed of light, and so it happens very quickly, and you got to stay in front of it. And you can lose control of the story and get overwhelmed by just this tsunami of misinformation. Something goes viral that's wrong, or even if it's right, if it goes viral, it's hard to stand against that kind of pressure. So control the conversation. How do you do that? Well, number one, you need to know ahead of time, what are your most important social media channels? Where do your stakeholders get their social media information? Is it Facebook? Is it Twitter? Is it Instagram? Is it YouTube? If you skew older, it's Facebook. So know ahead of time what your best platforms are, and know how to do them well, because that way you'll know if things start to go south, you'll know what a good day had looked like and how it works well. So you need to build and nurture your online communities through social media ahead of time. That you can go to the point of developing, ambassadors that are deputized to be your social media ambassadors in a crisis. You don't want too many, and you got to be careful who you get, and you got to be careful how you use them. But you want to have relationships, people that love you, that are willing to go to bat for you in social media if it comes to it. You need to keep your social media plans up to date. It's really important to secure support from your leadership in the social media realm. A lot of people write it off. They just think it's, for millennials. but your leadership and decision makers need to realize how important it is, because that's where, if something goes wrong, it usually starts in social media, or you see it first in social media. So anyhow, so when you want, again, stay in control of the conversation, you want to keep your messages, the same message that you use offline, you want to use online. You want consistency all the time. You want to monitor key and relevant keywords. You want to promote, you have your own hashtags and promote them. And again, like I said, possibly think about recruiting a team of social media ambassadors who could come to your defense. Again, social media is risky, especially when it gets in the hands of members of missions agencies who, got their own social media networks and relationships. A lot of them due to fundraising or whatever. You have to have a policy about, in a crisis, a general policy about social media for employees, but also, especially during a crisis, here's what we're saying. Don't go outside that. You're not trying to, silence or gag anybody, but you want people make mistakes. People say stupid things and they say them to the wrong people. And, something could be taken out of context and all of a sudden it becomes a controversy. A decision tree. So, you get in social media, you're monitoring the messaging. Does a message warrant a response? Most of them don't. Should a message be deleted? Well, if something's, number one, you can hide things rather than just delete them. And that's usually a good thing to do, because it doesn't make the person who started it, and they don't know it and they don't get madder. But, sometimes you need to delete messages that are erroneous or incorrect, or they're vile, or they're vulgar. There's nothing wrong with that. And sometimes you want to hide messages that, are misinformation. You don't want, it's hard. You start burying the truth, you're in trouble. I mean, it's hard it's hard to resist somebody saying something that hurts you, but they're right. But sometimes you got to let that happen. But it's really important to, if you see something, say something about a comment that may be dangerous, or you can see a spark of a threat of something that could develop into something worse, and let leadership know about it. And, you need to, during a crisis, especially if it's really a hot one, you want a social media report every day. What are they saying? What are they saying? What are they saying? It's intelligence, So that's sort of, how you decide what to do with a message.
Hey, Palmer, we have 5 minutes until the top of the hour.
Okay. All right. So I'll finish quickly here. So it's really important to do after you have a crisis, to go through your plan and figure out what you did right, what you did wrong, what you might do differently. Some of the things we learned during the Ebola crisis. God's in control. Don't ever forget that. Okay. He is. We saw it. Be prepared, have a plan, practice it, know it. Families can hurt you. You got somebody's been kidnapped. You got a crazy uncle that's talking to the news media. They can hurt you. We had that happen in the Ebola crisis. Some kids, part of our families, developed their own relationships with the media, and they pulled them away from us. And that's something you need to take into account. Backup. It's important to have a backup for every position, for fatigue or unavailability. Some crises can actually raise donations, and you ought to have a landing page prepared to where people can give. During the Ebola crisis, people wanted to give to SIM, and SIM didn't have a mechanism for it till about halfway through. So, that's something we learned. The crisis can have a positive effect in some ways. Media, it can become a media tsunami. The Ebola crisis was overwhelming. With the media, you're swimming with sharks. Okay, they come out of New York. Even if it's not too much of a controversy, they're still tough. Okay, and this guy, Matt Lauer, I've never seen a guy who could fake sincerity any better than this guy. It was scary. So I had to deal with him. I dealt with Anderson Cooper all these people. So anyhow, competition. Sometimes there are other people involved that have a stake in the PR. For instance, the Georgia hospitals that the Ebola patients went to, Emory, they wanted to do their own PR thing. So you're sort of competing with them against their narrative. So there are other people out there that want to tell your story too, tell the story. Very high pressure. When the television networks would come to me and they say, Palmer, we've got a book deal, a movie deal, an international news agency organization. Let us tell your story. And they came to me, I was like the Godfather asking for a favor, but I never would do it, because to deal with one exclusively is to leave out all the others and miss a lot of people telling the story. So don't be surprised if they come to you and try to woo you, because they are master manipulators. Care and feeding in the news media is just, you need to understand that. Sequencing usually is a sequence of hard news stories first, feature stories later, opinion pieces sort of follow that. Then the international media gets involved. So there's a sort of a pattern of how this thing unfolds over time. Local media is very important. We really took care of the Charlotte Observer and put them at the front of the line, and they really appreciate it, because most people wouldn't do that. They'd want to talk to Matt Lauer, you know. But your local media is your best friend, because you got to live with them later. Other communicators, like I said, you're going to be competing against. They're going to have their own megaphones because they want to tell their aspect of the story. Media covers the results for us. We got over 4 months, we got 30,000 positive media hits. I think it was probably almost twice that we could track. And you can't track radio, so that's not including radio, but 30,000 positive media hits. That if we had bought that space in advertising, it had an ad value equivalency of $300 million. Okay, if you're on CNN every night for 4 months, what is that worth? In terms of advertising. So SIM got $300 million worth of exposure, branding exposure out of this. Okay, it ended up their doctors on the cover. This is the Time Person of the Year issue. The Ebola fighters were that, and this is an SIM doctor. So I should have retired. If my guy was on the cover of Time Magazine Person of the Year, what else is there? But that's what. But they did it right. They did it God's way, and they ended up where they ended up. So you can go to our website. There's a checklist there, so you can sort of give yourself a little self-test about where you might be in terms of readiness and crisis communications. Just go through it. And if and it's like going to the doctor, getting your test results. So do that. We have a free strategy sessions if anybody ever wants to talk to us about crisis communications, planning, media training, active crisis management. We offer a free strategy session. It's on our website. So time for Q&A, and my timer just went off. So I think we're ready. So again, this is our contact information. It's on the website. This is Heather's information if you need to get in touch with her. And thank you for allowing me to talk with you. So we'll take questions. And I'll stop sharing.
Great. Thank you, Palmer. This was really good. Any of you who are here, send along your questions. I didn't see any questions pop up during Palmer's presentation, but Palmer, I have a question to get you started. Can you share another example that you might not have shared without using any names, of a situation where things went right or wrong? You can decide.
Let me try to think of one. Well, maybe you all remember there was a story in the news about a pastor who, in the middle of the night on an airplane, urinated on a passenger. And it was a pastor. And it's long story short, but that word came to us. This was a church in North Carolina that had a problem. I mean, that it was terrible. And it took for a long time for this played out in the media before they finally identified who it was. And so what we did our discovery, we did our research, we realized, number one, he wasn't a pastor. He was on staff, and he was a marketing guy. Number two, he had his own ministry that he was on this trip about this trip on this airplane in the middle of the night, and he ended up he had a drinking problem, and he was taking some powerful antidepressant, some sort of psych drugs, and the combination. He was basically sleepwalking. He didn't do anything on purpose. He was basically asleep. But we realized that he wasn't a pastor. That's good. Number two, he had his own ministry. Good. He wasn't on a trip related to the church, and so they were able to distance themselves from him, and they had a settlement with him. It was a fair settlement. He realized that he couldn't stay there, but it ended up we changed the narrative, because for a while they were speculating that the pastor from North Carolina was Will Graham,
Yep.
And so, but we were able to change the narrative. It wasn't this church anymore. It was this individual, and he worked the church. He was already on probation. They were trying to work with him, and so they slipped that punch. I mean, so that was a success.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever had. And when the John Chow, we handled the John Chow missionary death off. Yeah, that
with All Nations, right?
Yeah, that's All Nations. We helped change that narrative, because it was about some evangelical renegade, rogue Christian infiltrating culture and jeopardizing their health. The world wanted to treat them like they were animals in a zoo that some sort of they wanted to preserve them. So there was a big danger about bringing disease in, and so and the whole thing about, how dare you evangelicals think people want to hear your message. And so we were able to turn that around, and help people understand that this guy was just doing what, God wants to save these people regardless of, what culture they've got going on and how ancient it is. And so we were able to change the narrative on that. So, but I don't think I've ever really had one that went in the ditch.
Good. That's good. Let's move on from that, because I was thinking, you mentioned developing social media ambassadors. Can you share a little bit more about how do you find a good social media ambassador?
Well, what you do is, if you're really paying attention, who's on there a lot. Well, number one, they follow you. Number two, they are on there in a positive way with pretty good frequency, and you might what you want to do is develop a relationship with them, with the social media coordinator and them. This become a personal thing, and so then you can feel better about trying to recruit them and say, hey, look, there may be times where, of course, we're not going to try to hide anything, but if we need some people to come to our defense, because we haven't done anything wrong, and would you be willing to be an ambassador for us in a subtle, selective way? So you get about half a dozen of those, or you don't want too many, and you don't want too few, because you don't want the same person doing the same thing. But you can pull these from your own ranks. Your own members can be some of these people.
Okay, so you like a good group, but it seems like it would be beneficial for some to be outside your organization.
Oh yeah. No, ideally you want people outside if you can get them, but it doesn't mean you can't sprinkle in some inside people, because people are not going to necessarily know, unless it becomes very big and very blown up, that they're part of your organization at all. They're just a name. So anyhow, that's how you do it.
Good. Another question. At the very beginning, you mentioned having clearly defined communications channels in order to maintain your good communication. What does that look like?
Well, think about how you communicate with your stakeholders. You do it with phone calls, you do it with emails, you do it with maybe text, you do it with your website, do it through social media, you do special events, you print things and mail them, you do direct mail. Those are all the communications channels that you want to integrate and within, say, and digitally, you may have 2 or 3 different newsletters that you put out digitally in the digital channel. Maybe it's a prayer letter, maybe it's a monthly update. So you identify those channels and whatever those deliverables are that you use on a day in, day out communications basis, and just see what like almost like a grid or a map of what you've got, so that you know that you're talking to everybody. And these things, the different deliverables have different frequencies, and it doesn't mean you can't change those, but it's about understanding, using all your channels that can serve you, that serve you on a good day. They can serve you in a crisis. You just need to identify them, because it's kind of like, okay, I've got this inventory of opportunity, of possibilities. Do I want to put this out on social media, or don't I? What do we want to put on the web? What's the direct mail piece going to look like? So that's, you want to use all the channels you've got reasonably. I mean, it doesn't mean you have to use them all.
Yeah.
But it's a decision. You need to know it ahead of time, what you've got, and decision in the midst of it, what you're going to use and how.
Good. Is there anything else, Palmer, that you would like to share with this group before we finish up?
The whole point, again, the biggest thing for me, the biggest obstacle to getting crisis communications plans in place is getting people to get beyond the denial, and to at least take a look at what it would take to do a plan, and because it's not as expensive as you think. And if people have a plan, we can vet it. If they don't have a plan, we can make one for them. And we're going to be coming out with 3 products. One is sort of a custom plan, another, do it for you. Then there's going to be a second plan package that sort of do it with you. We work together on it. And then hopefully one day we might come out with a do it yourself, crisis communications in a can product, where everything's templatized and you're pretty much 3/4 of the way there by just buying the package and filling in the blanks. So, and then the media training course is really important. Most organizations don't have professional media spokespersons. So training, at least orientation, is really important. So I would just, help my organization, my leadership realize that they are naked. They don't know it. It can be done, because I do it for a living, and I see people who do it well and people who with smaller budgets that still do it well. But you need to do it, because otherwise, you're going to be flat-footed and the tsunamis, 100 yards off the coast, and you're going to be buried. So I'm like I said, I'm a sort of Johnny Appleseed about this, of an evangelist, and maybe we can do something with Missio Nexus where we can do something that's a do-it-yourself product that we can discount to membership, and if we can do enough of it, so I just want to see people protected and, available to handle things when they come, and not potentially be wiped out. And, and if you have an active crisis, call, and you need to talk to somebody like me, call as early as possible, because usually people wait a week or 2 and they're already up to their neck in it. And we have to do this triage, stop the bleeding kind of crisis PR first, just to stop the bleeding, So anyhow, and if people have questions, call me, send me emails, get a free strategy session, do that checklist, take your temperature, and then try to find somebody. And if you're not a decision maker, or find an advocate for yourself internally who could go to war with you on this, or go to the mat with you to try to get this done, because it may take somebody, an internal advocate that gets it and can help you. So anyway.
Thank you very much, Palmer. Yeah. And thanks for what you shared with us today. Yeah. Till then, I encourage you to consider joining the Communications Director and Staff cohort, which you can find under the Program and Cohorts menu. This will enable you to connect with other people engaged in marketing and communications and also serving in missions.
I want to do that. I'm going to join.
Great. Thanks. Thank you also to everyone who joined and participated with us. I'm Heather Peebles, along with Mary Kay, our producer.